His wife divorced him to marry her manager, and neither one of them knew they had both been working for him the entire time. A quiet man, 9 years of marriage, 9 years of being called too small, too still, too comfortable with average. By a wife who stopped seeing him, by a mother-in-law who never did, and by the man who slid into his house, sat in his chair, and made a joke about men who peak early. They signed the divorce papers. They posted the relationship announcement. They moved into a penthouse together and started planning a future built on money, status, and the absolute certainty that the man they left behind had nothing left to offer. What they did not know, what they could not have imagined, was that the firm they woke up every morning and drove to, the $34 billion company that signed their checks and funded their lifestyle and made them feel untouchable, had a controlling interest holder, a majority owner, a man whose signature sat at the top of their entire world. And that man had just received a phone call from an attorney telling him exactly what he owned. What do you do when you discover that everything your enemies built their arrogance on was sitting in your name the whole time? If this story is already hitting different, go ahead and tap that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep these coming. Subscribe if you're new here, because we are just getting started. And drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from today. Now let me take you all the way back to a Saturday morning in southwest Atlanta, a barbershop on the west side, and a man sitting very still in a chair, reading a text message that was about to change absolutely everything. The phone buzzed against the armrest at 11:14 in the morning. Terence Booker felt the vibration before he heard it. Cecil had just finished the fade on his left side, the clippers humming their familiar low note, the shop smelling the way it always smelled, clipper oil, cedar wood spray, the faint ghost of somebody's breakfast from the diner 2 doors down. It was a normal Saturday. It felt like a normal Saturday. He picked up the phone and read the message. 4 sentences, no phone call, no conversation first, just 4 sentences and a single emoji at the end. A small yellow face with its eyes closed, like whatever she had to say was already settled, already filed, already done. Terence read it once. He set the phone face down on the armrest. He looked straight ahead at his own reflection in the mirror. Cecil's clippers slowed. The old man had been cutting hair in that shop for 31 years. He had seen men get news in that chair. All kinds of news, the kind that made them cry, the kind that made them want to fight, the kind that just hollowed them out like something had reached inside and taken the center. He knew how a man's face moved when something hit it. He watched Terence's face now and saw almost nothing, just a small tightening around the jaw, just a breath, slightly longer than the one before it. Cecil set the clippers down on the counter. "You ain't surprised," he said. It wasn't a question. Terence looked at his reflection for another moment before he answered. "No," he said. Cecil picked the clippers back up. He didn't ask anything else. That was the thing about Cecil. He understood that some silences weren't empty. Some silences were full of 9 years of history that a man had already finished grieving in private, one small piece at a time. The text was from Vanessa, his wife of 9 years. It said she had retained an attorney, and it said the papers would arrive within the week. It said she hoped they could handle everything with maturity. The emoji at the end was the one that looked peaceful, which was the strangest choice she could have made, and somehow the most accurate one, because she was at peace. She had made her decision months ago. The text was just the paperwork. Terence already knew why. He had known for 2 weeks. 2 Saturdays before that morning, he had come home from a longer shift than expected to find a car parked in his driveway. A silver Bentley Continental, clean as a showroom floor, sitting in the spot where his truck usually went. He had stood in the driveway for a moment, just looking at it. Then he had gone inside. Vanessa was at the stove. The dining room table had 3 place settings instead of 2. And sitting at the head of Terence's table, in Terence's chair, at Terence's table, in Terence's house, was a man in a white dress shirt with French cuffs, a man Terence had never formally met but had seen in photographs on Vanessa's work phone enough times to know exactly who he was. Raymond Cross, Vanessa's regional director at Vanguard Premier Wealth, the man who earned $500,000 a year and wanted everyone in a 30-foot radius to feel the weight of that fact. Vanessa introduced them without apology, smooth and quick, the way you introduce 2 people at a networking event, not the way you introduce your husband to a man sitting in his chair. Raymond stood up and extended a hand and looked at Terence the way certain men look at certain other men, a fast, clinical assessment, top to bottom, that ended in a kind of quiet contempt. Vanessa's mother Patricia was there too, sitting with a glass of wine already poured, already comfortable, already at home, in a way that told Terence this was not the first time Raymond had been in this house while he wasn't there. The dinner was cordial on the surface and brutal underneath. Raymond talked about his division's quarterly numbers, about a conference in Miami he was taking a select team to, about the nature of vision and what separated men who built things from men who simply maintained them. He never looked directly at Terence when he said any of it. He didn't need to. Patricia laughed at everything he said, the kind of laugh that meant she agreed with all of it, including the parts that weren't jokes. Then Raymond said it, almost offhand, almost casual. He said some men were built for the long climb, and some men peaked early, and there was no shame in knowing which one you were. He smiled when he said it. Vanessa looked at her plate. Patricia laughed the loudest she had laughed all evening. Terence folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, and stood up from the table. He said he had some things to take care of. Nobody asked what things. Nobody followed. Now, 2 weeks later, he sat in Cecil's chair with the phone face down on the armrest, and the divorce text still unread a second time. Cecil finished the cut. He brushed the back of Terence's neck with the soft bristle brush, the way he had done since Terence was 12 years old, sitting in the same chair. Terence stood, checked the mirror once, and paid. He was almost at the door when Cecil spoke. "Terence?" He turned around. Cecil was already looking away, already reaching for his own phone, on the counter beside the clippers, already pulling up a number. His face was unreadable, which was unusual because Cecil's face was almost always readable. "You have a good afternoon," Cecil said quietly. Terence nodded and walked out into the Atlanta morning. Behind him he heard Cecil begin to dial. He didn't think about it then. He would later. The text was the end of something, but the end had been coming for a long time, built slowly, quietly, one small cruelty at a time, across 9 years of a marriage that only one person had been truly fighting for. Terence Booker met Vanessa Hayes in the spring of 2015 at a church picnic in Cascade Heights. She was 28 and sharp and laughed easily back then, and he was 30 and steady in the way that some men are steady, not flashy, not loud, just present. They were married 11 months later in a ceremony at Vanessa's home church, with Patricia Hayes in the front pew, wearing a hat that cost more than Terence's first car, and an expression that suggested she was already reserving her judgment. Terence was a facilities operations manager for a commercial property company called Meridian South Group. He managed buildings, their systems, their maintenance schedules, their vendors and contractors. It was honest, skilled work, and he was good at it. He earned $67,000 a year and came home clean and on time and cooked on Sundays without being asked, filling the kitchen with the smell of pot roast and cornbread, while gospel radio played low from the counter speaker. Patricia called him a maintenance man, not to his face at first. In the beginning it was in the way she phrased things, asking Vanessa in front of him whether she had considered what kind of ceiling a man in his field could reach. asking it the way a woman asks a question she already knows the answer to, already dislikes, and wants you to dislike too. Terence heard it. He said nothing. Vanessa climbed fast at Vanguard Premier Wealth. She had a gift for people and a sharper gift for money, and the firm recognized both early. By year 3, she had her first promotion. By year 5, she was clearing $180,000. By year 7, she crossed $250,000, and Patricia threw a dinner party to celebrate that Terence catered himself, driving across town with a foil-covered tray of his own, cooking, while Patricia toasted her daughter's success with a glass of Chablis and did not once say his name. The income gap between them became Patricia's favorite measuring stick. She began calling him Vanessa's first husband, always within earshot, always delivered lightly, like a joke, the way certain people use lightness as a delivery mechanism for things they mean completely. At Thanksgiving, at Easter, at Vanessa's cousin's graduation party in a backyard in Lithonia, where Patricia said it to 3 women from her church circle, while Terence stood 12 feet away, refilling the ice. He heard every word. He carried the ice inside and came back out and handed Patricia a fresh drink because her glass was empty. That was the kind of man he was. He fixed the pipe under Patricia's kitchen sink without being asked, on a January Saturday, lying on his back on a cold tile floor for 2 hours, while Patricia watched a program in the next room and said, "Thank you," the way you say it to a repairman. He replaced the water heater in her garage the following spring. He drove Vanessa's Aunt Corinne to her dialysis appointments 3 Tuesdays in a row when her regular ride fell through, without mentioning it to anyone. These things were not tallied. He did not keep score. Around year 5, Vanessa stopped defending him, not dramatically. There was no argument, no moment where she made a decision and announced it. It happened the way erosion happens, gradually, invisibly, until one day the ground was just different, and you could not point to the exact moment it had changed. When Patricia made her comments at family functions, Vanessa began looking at her phone. When Terence's name was left out of celebrations, Vanessa began to leave it out too. She did not push him out, she simply stopped pulling him in. His one constant was Cecil's barbershop. Every Saturday morning, same chair, same time. Cecil had known him since he was 12 years old and spoke to him like the man he was, not the man anyone else needed him to be. The shop was a different world, warm, loud, honest, full of men who talked about real things and laughed about real things and had no use for performance. Terence exhaled there in a way he had stopped exhaling almost everywhere else. It was at Cecil's that he first noticed the older man, Gordon Okafor. He came in occasionally, not for haircuts, he was past the age of needing them, but to sit, to talk to Cecil, to drink the bad coffee Cecil kept on a hot plate by the back wall and watch the room. He always greeted Terence by name, though Terence could not remember introducing himself. He had a way of lingering near Terence specifically, asking quiet questions about his work and his life, listening to the answers with the focused attention of someone gathering information they intend to use. Terence thought he was simply a friendly old man. He thought nothing more of it. In the fall of 2023, Vanessa was promoted to senior client advisor. Patricia threw another dinner party, bigger than the last one, catered this time by a real caterer, which Patricia made sure to mention to everyone who arrived. Terence came. He sat at the table and smiled and clapped with everyone else when Patricia stood and raised her glass to her daughter's achievement. Patricia talked for 4 minutes about Vanessa's drive, her vision, her excellence, the Vanguard name, the future she was building. She did not say Terence's name once. He drove home alone that night. He sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. Then he went in and washed the one dish he had left in the sink that morning and went to bed. The promotion brought Vanessa into Raymond Cross's orbit. And Raymond Cross changed everything. What Raymond and Vanessa could not see was what Cecil had already set in motion the morning of that text, but that story would take 6 more months to fully arrive. In the meantime, Terence Booker did what he had always done. He went to work, he came home, he kept moving. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a cream-colored envelope with the return address of Dwight Okafor and Associates, attorneys at law, Suite 114, Peachtree Street Northeast, Atlanta, Georgia. Terence almost set it aside with the rest of the mail. Something about the weight of it made him stop. He stood at his kitchen counter and opened it carefully, the way he did most things, without rushing, without tearing. The letter was 4 paragraphs. It informed him that a Mr. Gordon Okafor had passed away 6 weeks prior. It informed him that Terence Andre Booker had been named as the primary successor beneficiary to a trust instrument known as the Okafor Founding Interest Trust, established in 1987 and most recently amended in 2019. It requested his presence at the offices of Dwight Okafor and Associates at his earliest convenience. It said the matter was of significant financial importance. Terence read it twice. He set it on the counter. He thought about the old man at Cecil's shop, the quiet questions, the careful attention, the way Gordon Okafor had always said his name like it meant something. He thought about how Gordon had stopped coming into the shop about 7 months ago, and Cecil had simply said he was not well, and Terence had sent his well wishes through Cecil without knowing there would be no more time. He called the number on the letterhead the following morning. The offices of Dwight Okafor and Associates occupied the 11th floor of a glass building on Peachtree Street, and they looked exactly like what they were. The offices of a man who had spent 30 years handling serious money for serious people. Dark wood, thick carpet, no music in the waiting room, just the quiet hum of something important happening just out of earshot. Dwight Okafor was 52 years old and built like a man who had been told difficult truths his entire career and had learned to deliver them with the same precision and calm he received them. He looked like his father, around the eyes. He shook Terence's hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk, and did not waste a single word on preamble. He opened a leather portfolio and laid 3 documents on the desk in a clean row. He explained that Gordon Okafor had been one of 3 founding partners of Vanguard Premier Wealth when the firm was established in 1987. He explained that Gordon's founding equity stake, 51.3% of the original ownership class, had been held in trust since the firm's restructuring in 2004. He explained that in 2019, Gordon had amended that trust to name Terence Andre Booker as the sole successor beneficiary upon his death. Terence looked at the documents. He did not speak. Dwight continued. He explained that the founding equity class carried a controlling interest provision written into Vanguard's original partnership agreement, a provision that had never been altered and remained fully enforceable. Under that provision, the holder of the founding equity class had unilateral authority. The word unilateral, Dwight said, meant without board consensus, without shareholder vote, and without requirement of explanation. The controlling interest holder could dissolve divisions, terminate senior appointments, restructure leadership, approve or reject all executive compensation at will. Terence said, "How much is it worth?" Dwight said, "As of last quarter's valuation, $7.74 billion. The room was very quiet. Terence sat with that number for a long moment. Not with excitement, not with disbelief. With the particular stillness of a man absorbing something that changes the entire shape of everything he thought he understood. He asked how Gordon had known him. Dwight almost smiled. He said Gordon had been watching Terence at Cecil's shop for years, that Gordon had started going in not for haircuts, as Terence had correctly suspected, but specifically because Cecil had told him about the man in the chair who never broke. He said Gordon had a phrase he used about Terence in private. He reached into the portfolio and removed a single handwritten note card, yellowed slightly at the edges, and read from it directly. "The stillest man I ever saw. and still men move mountains eventually. Terence looked at the note card for a long time. Then Dwight said there was one more thing. He turned to the third document. He explained that Vanguard's executive compensation structure required annual ratification from the controlling interest holder for all senior appointments. He explained that this ratification had been auto-processing on Gordon's standing approval for years. He explained that the standing approval had died with Gordon 6 weeks ago. He turned the document so Terence could read it clearly. He pointed to a line near the top. A name, a compensation figure, Raymond Cross, Regional Director, annual compensation package $520,000 pending ratification. Terence looked at the name. He looked at the number. He thought about a silver Bentley in his driveway. He thought about French cuffs and a comment about men who peak early and the sound of Patricia's laughter carrying across his own dinner table. He looked up at Dwight. "What do I have to do," he said, "to make this official?" Dwight reached beneath the portfolio and placed a single, clean document on the desk between them. A pen rested on top of it. He had already prepared the paperwork. He had simply been waiting for Terence to walk through the door. Terence drove home from Dwight's office in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the Atlanta afternoon moving past his windows and his hands steady on the wheel, and $7.74 billion sitting quietly in the back of his mind like a fact that had not yet decided what shape it wanted to take. He sat in his apartment for a long time that evening. He was not celebrating. He was not angry. He was doing what he had always done in the moments that mattered most. He was being still and letting clarity arrive at its own pace. And when it arrived completely. He called Dwight the following morning. They met back at the Peachtree Street office 2 days later, and this time Terence came with questions instead of silence. He sat across from Dwight with a legal pad and a pen, not because he needed to write anything down, but because he wanted Dwight to understand that he was listening with his full attention. Dwight appreciated that. He opened the portfolio and they went to work. The strategy had 3 phases, and Dwight laid them out in order like a surgeon describing an operation. Precise, sequential, no unnecessary movement. Phase 1 was the formal seating. Dwight would file the controlling interest documentation with Vanguard's partnership board, transferring the Okafor Founding Interest Trust into Terence's active authority. The notification to the board would be official and legally airtight, but the identity of the new controlling interest holder would not be disclosed publicly. Not yet. The board would know a transfer had occurred. They would not know who was now sitting at the top of their ownership structure. Terence would become the most powerful person connected to Vanguard Premier Wealth without a single person inside that building knowing his name. Phase 2 was the compensation hold. Under the controlling interest provision, Raymond Cross's annual compensation ratification, the $520,000 package that had been auto-processing on Gordon's standing approval for years, was now expired and pending. Terence had the unilateral right to withhold that ratification without explanation, without notice, and without any requirement to provide a reason. He would exercise that right immediately. Raymond's bonus would freeze the moment the Phase 1 filing was processed, and Raymond would have no legal avenue to challenge it because the provision that governed it was written into the founding documents of his own firm. Dwight said this part with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had read those founding documents many times and appreciated their elegance. Phase 3 was the audit. As controlling interest holder, Terence had the right to request a full forensic audit of any division operating under Vanguard's structure. He would exercise that right against Raymond's regional division. The audit request would be filed as a routine governance action. Nothing personal, nothing targeted in appearance. Just a new ownership partner conducting due diligence. It was here that Dwight paused and reached for a separate folder. He said that before Terence made the audit request formal, there was something he needed to see. He explained that during the preliminary financial review his office had conducted as part of the trust transfer process, His team had flagged irregularities in Raymond Cross's expense reporting, 3 years of records, client entertainment expenses billed to the firm and simultaneously claimed through a secondary expense channel, double billed. The total discrepancy was $340,000. Terence looked at the summary page Dwight placed in front of him. He said nothing for a moment. Then he asked what happened when FINRA found out about something like this. Dwight said FINRA did not find out on its own. Someone had to notify them. He said the cleanest approach was to let the forensic audit surface the evidence through proper channels. Auditors document, auditors report, regulators are notified as required by law. No anonymous tips, no shortcuts, just the process doing exactly what the process was designed to do. Terence nodded once. He had one instruction for Dwight, and he delivered it in the same quiet voice he used for everything. "Do not use my name," he said, "until I am ready to use it myself." Dwight wrote nothing down. He did not need to. He said he understood completely, and Terence believed him, because Dwight Okafor was the kind of man who understood things the first time. Terence went back to work the next morning. He managed his buildings and answered his emails and ate his lunch in the break room and nodded at his co-workers in the hallway. He went to Cecil's shop that Saturday, same time, same chair. Cecil cut his hair and they talked about nothing important, and the shop smelled like clipper oil and cedar wood spray, and everything was exactly as it had always been on the outside. On the inside, 3 phases of a surgical plan were moving quietly toward completion. The Phase 1 filing was submitted at 9:02 in the morning on a Wednesday. Terence was at his desk eating a turkey sandwich when it happened. His phone did not ring. No notification arrived. Nothing in his day changed at all. 31 floors above the street, in the Buckhead Tower that housed Vanguard Premier Wealth's executive offices, a paralegal walked down a carpeted hallway holding a cream-colored envelope. She knocked on the door of the boardroom, where the weekly leadership meeting was already in session. She placed the envelope on the table, and Raymond Cross's afternoon was about to change completely. The envelope landed on the Vanguard boardroom table at 11:47 on a Wednesday morning. The board chair read it first, then he read it again. Then he called an emergency session for 2 o'clock that afternoon, and he did not tell anyone why. By 3 o'clock, every senior leader at Vanguard Premier Wealth knew that the firm's controlling interest had transferred. A new majority holder now sat at the top of their ownership structure. The holder's identity was legally protected. Their attorneys had communicated only what was required, and effective immediately, all executive compensation packages requiring ratification from the controlling interest position were frozen pending review. Raymond Cross's $520,000 package was first on that list. Raymond found out the same afternoon. His assistant forwarded him the internal compliance notice with no explanation, because there was no explanation to give. He read it at his desk and his face went very still. He called his personal attorney before he called anyone at Vanguard. He asked how this was possible. His attorney said it was not only possible, it was airtight. Raymond demanded to know who the new controlling interest holder was. His attorney called Dwight Okafor's office. Dwight's paralegal answered, took a message, and did not return the call that day. Raymond spent the next week making noise. He called board members. He sent emails marked urgent. He told anyone who would listen that this was irregular, that something was wrong, that a transfer of this magnitude warranted full transparency. The board chair told him the transfer was legally executed and the holder's identity was protected under the original partnership agreement. There was nothing to be done. Then the audit notice arrived. It came on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the Phase 1 filing. A formal forensic audit of Raymond's regional division, requested by the controlling interest holder under Governance Provision 7 of the founding partnership agreement. Scope: all expense reporting, client billing, and division financial records for the preceding 36 months. Raymond's attorney told him to cooperate fully. The auditors arrived the following Monday with laptops and bankers' boxes and the unhurried confidence of people who already knew what they were going to find. It took them 9 days. The report was 41 pages, $340,000 in client entertainment expenses, double billed across a secondary expense channel over 3 years. The pattern was systematic, not accidental. The auditors flagged it as intentional misappropriation. Vanguard's compliance team was required by law to notify FINRA. They notified FINRA on a Friday afternoon. Raymond's securities licenses were suspended the following Tuesday. He could not legally operate as regional director without active licenses. Vanguard placed him on administrative leave that same afternoon. The press release used the phrase pending investigation, which in Atlanta's financial community meant exactly what everyone understood it to mean. Terence was eating breakfast when Dwight called to confirm the suspension. He listened. He said thank you. He finished his eggs. Phase 3 arrived 10 days later. Dwight filed the dissolution paperwork at 9:15 on a Monday morning. 1 document, 1 signature. Under the controlling interest provision, the regional Southeast Division of Vanguard Premier Wealth was formally dissolved. 14 staff members received reassignment notices before lunch. Raymond's corner office was cleared by facilities before the end of the business day. His nameplate came off the door. His parking space was reassigned. Everything he had built inside that building, the title, the team, the infrastructure, the platform, gone in a single filing. Vanessa felt it immediately. 80% of her client book had come through Raymond's division. Introductions he had made, accounts he had sponsored, relationships built entirely on the foundation of his position and his network. When the division dissolved, those accounts began departing within the week. Some called to say they were leaving. Most simply sent the paperwork. By the end of the month, Vanessa's revenue numbers had collapsed so dramatically that Vanguard's HR department placed her on formal performance review. She called Raymond in a panic. Raymond did not have good answers. He was a man who had spent years performing certainty, and certainty had become very expensive to maintain. The Buckhead penthouse lease was $4,800 a month. Raymond had taken it on the confidence of a $520,000 income that no longer existed. With his licenses suspended and his position dissolved and his legal fees mounting, the first missed payment arrived in week 11, the second in week 12. The eviction notice came in week 13. They were out by week 16. Patricia Hayes deleted 7 months of social media posts in a single afternoon. The carefully curated photographs of Raymond at charity galas, Raymond at the Vanguard office's holiday party, Vanessa and Raymond at a Buckhead restaurant where the entrees cost more than Terence's car payment. All of it gone. Her church circle noticed. Her neighbors noticed. The silence where the celebration used to be was louder than anything she could have posted. Atlanta noticed too. The financial community is not large, and a story this clean travels fast. A regional director suspended by FINRA, a division dissolved by a mystery ownership partner, a relationship that had started with a man's divorce and ended with an eviction. People talked, they always do. Terence heard none of it directly. He was at work. He was at Cecil's shop on Saturdays. He was living his life in the same quiet key he always had. Then Dwight called on a Thursday morning and said the board had received a formal request. The controlling interest holder was requesting a face-to-face meeting with all relevant parties, including Raymond Cross. Raymond spent the rest of that day trying to find out who was coming. He still did not know. The morning of the meeting, Terence woke at 6, made a pot of coffee, and sat at his kitchen table in the quiet for a long time. He was not nervous. He had learned somewhere across the long years of his life that stillness was not the absence of feeling. It was the mastery of it. He felt everything. He simply did not let it move him before he was ready to be moved. He put on a dark suit, single-breasted, well-fitted, the one he kept for occasions that required a man to walk into a room and be taken seriously without saying a word. He tied his tie without rushing. He looked at himself in the mirror for exactly 1 moment. Then he picked up his keys and drove downtown. Dwight was waiting at the building entrance at 8:55. They rode the elevator to the 31st floor without speaking. They had already said everything that needed to be said. Today was not a day for words between them. Today was a day for presence. The boardroom was long and glassed on two sides, with a view of the Atlanta skyline that was designed to remind anyone sitting inside it exactly how much was at stake. 6 board members were already seated along the sides of the table. The board chair stood near the window, speaking quietly to Vanguard's general counsel. 2 additional attorneys sat at the far end with their portfolios open. Raymond Cross sat halfway down the left side of the table. He looked like a man who had not slept well in weeks, which was accurate, because he had not. The French cuffs were still there, but the ease was gone. The performance of effortless dominance that had always surrounded him like a second suit, that was gone too. He looked diminished in the way that only truly arrogant people look diminished when the ground shifts beneath them because they have no practice absorbing loss. He was looking at the door when Terence walked through it. The recognition arrived in stages, like a slow collision. First confusion, because the mind protects itself from things it cannot immediately process. Then something that resembled understanding, but not yet the full weight of it. Then slowly, a recognition that landed across Raymond's face like a verdict already read. Vanessa was seated just behind Raymond, slightly off to the side. She had come as support, as witness, as whatever she had convinced herself she still was to him. She saw Terence the moment he entered. Her face did not cycle through stages. It simply stopped. Terence walked the length of the room without looking at either of them. At the head of the table there was one chair that sat slightly apart from the others, the controlling interest seat, positioned at the axis of the entire structure. Nobody had told Terence where to sit. He did not need to be told. He pulled the chair out and sat down, and the room adjusted itself around him the way rooms do when the right person finally takes their rightful place in them. The board chair cleared his throat and introduced Terence formally, majority controlling partner of the founding equity class. Holder of 51.3% of Vanguard Premier Wealth's original ownership structure, effective as of the trust transfer executed 6 weeks prior. Raymond's hands were flat on the table, very still, like a man consciously preventing them from shaking. Terence looked at him for a long moment. Then he began to speak. He said he was not there to conduct legal business. Dwight could handle the legal business. He was there because some things deserved to be said out loud in a room with witnesses by the person who lived them. He talked about 9 years, about a marriage he had shown up for every single day, in every way he knew how, about cooking Sunday dinner and fixing what was broken and driving across town without being asked, and sitting at family tables where he was invisible and still passing the bread without complaint. He talked about what it cost a man to absorb that kind of erasure year after year and keep his hands clean and his head steady and his mouth closed. He looked at Vanessa when he said that part. She looked at the table. Then he turned to Raymond. He said he remembered the dinner. He remembered the Bentley in his driveway. He remembered the French cuffs and the performance and the way Raymond had looked at him, the fast clinical assessment that ended in quiet contempt. He remembered the comment about men who peak early and the specific sound of the laughter that followed it. He let that sit in the room for a moment. Then he said, "You told your sister I was comfortable being average. And I was, Vanessa, I genuinely was. But what you didn't know was that Raymond has been working for me for 3 years. Every title he had, every bonus he cashed, every client he ever introduced you to, all of it came from a desk inside my firm. You left your husband to go stand inside his house." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa's mouth opened. She started to say his name. Terence. He raised one hand. Quietly. Gently. Almost. And she stopped. Raymond found his voice somewhere in the rubble of his composure. He said this was outrageous. He said it would be challenged. He said his attorneys would dismantle every document in that portfolio before the week was out. Dwight reached into the leather portfolio and placed a single-bound document on the center of the table. The original Vanguard Premier Wealth Partnership Agreement, dated 1987, with Gordon Okafor's signature on page 1 and the controlling interest provision printed in plain language on page 7, exactly where it had always been. Raymond looked at it. He did not pick it up. Terence stood. He buttoned his jacket. One button, smooth and unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world. He looked at Raymond one final time across the length of the table. "You've been working for me for 3 years," he said. "I just never needed you to know it." He turned and walked toward the door. He did not look back. Look. Behind him, the boardroom was completely silent, except for the sound of his footsteps crossing the floor, steady and even and unhurried, like a man who had always known exactly where he was going. What happened next to Raymond and Vanessa took 6 months, and none of it was quiet. The FINRA investigation concluded in the spring. The findings were unambiguous. 3 years of systematic expense fraud, $340,000 in misappropriated funds, a pattern deliberate enough that the investigators used the word willful in their final report. Raymond Cross's securities licenses were permanently revoked. He would never work in financial services again, not in Atlanta, not anywhere. The criminal referral for wire fraud was filed with the United States Attorney's Office shortly after, and Raymond spent the better part of 4 months in consultation with defense attorneys whose fees were rapidly consuming whatever savings he had managed to protect from the collapse. The restitution figure was set at $680,000. The man who had once made $500,000 a year and told other men they peaked early was now a man with a revoked license, a pending federal referral, a stack of legal bills, and no Bentley in the driveway, because the Bentley had gone back to the dealership 3 months after the eviction when the lease payments became impossible to maintain. Vanessa did not stay in Atlanta. She resigned from Vanguard quietly 2 months after the boardroom meeting on a Tuesday morning when she submitted a single-paragraph letter and cleared her desk before noon. Her professional reputation in Atlanta's financial community was not something that could be repaired with time and distance. It was the kind of damage that traveled ahead of you that arrived at the next city before you did. She relocated. Where exactly, the people who had known her could not say with certainty. Patricia told her church circle it was a fresh start. The church circle nodded and said nothing because they already knew the full story, the way church circles in southwest Atlanta always know the full story before anyone officially tells it. Patricia Hayes's carefully constructed world of respectability had always depended on other people's belief in it. When that belief evaporated, when the women in her circle and the neighbors on her street and the cousins at the family reunions all understood what had actually happened, what her constant campaign against Terence Booker had actually been worth, there was nothing left to perform for. The hats and the chablis and the dinner parties and the pointed comments delivered in her sweetest voice, all of it had been a show, and the show had closed. Terence heard about most of this second-hand and thought about it very little. He had other things to do. 6 weeks after the boardroom meeting, he met with Dwight to discuss the establishment of a new non-profit entity. The Gordon Okafor Community Foundation, $12 million in initial endowment funded directly from the trust. Its mission was financial literacy education for young people in southwest Atlanta, the same southwest Atlanta where a barbershop had been the only room in Terence Booker's adult life where a man had ever looked at him and seen exactly what he was worth. The Foundation's first program launched on a Saturday morning in October in a community center 3 blocks from Cecil's shop. 47 teenagers sat in folding chairs learning about compound interest and credit scores and the difference between income and wealth. Terence sat in the back row. He did not speak. He did not need to. He named the foundation after Gordon because Gordon had believed in him before Terence had any visible reason to be believed in. That was the kind of thing that deserved to be permanent. On the first Saturday after the foundation launch, Terence went back to Cecil's shop. Same time, same chair. Cecil fastened the cape around his shoulders without a word, picked up the clippers, and started the fade on the left side. The shop smelled like clipper oil and cedar wood spray. Someone had brought food from the diner next door, and the smell of it drifted through the back. The radio played something low and familiar. Cecil did not ask a single question. That was the thing about Cecil. He had always understood that some stories didn't need narrating. He had already known the ending before Terence did. He just had the good grace to let it arrive on its own time. That evening, a mutual friend of Dwight's hosted a small rooftop dinner. 8 people, good food, the Atlanta skyline going gold in the October light. Terence was introduced to a woman named Simone Ibarra. She was an architect with her own firm, small and precise, and focused on affordable residential design in underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. She shook his hand and asked him a question about the foundation that told him she had actually listened when their host explained what it was. She asked good questions the whole evening. She did not check her phone once. There was no dramatic moment between them. No speech, no declaration, no weight of everything Terence had been through pressing itself into the conversation. There were just 2 people at a rooftop table in the Atlanta evening, talking about real things in the easy way you talk when you are not performing anything for anyone. That was the reward. Not the billions, not the boardroom, not the look on Raymond's face when the documents landed on the table. The reward was the ease, the quietness of a life with nothing left to absorb and nothing left to prove. Here is what this story teaches if you are willing to hear it. Still water runs the deepest. The people who never needed to announce their power, who never needed a room to validate their worth, who simply kept showing up and doing the work and being still when everything around them demanded noise, those were always the ones who had it. Real power does not perform. It simply arrives, and when it arrives, it does not shout. It just sits down at the head of the table. Now, what would you have done in Terence's position? When you found out what you owned and who had been living inside it without knowing, would you have walked into that boardroom? Would you have waited as long as he did? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, tap that like button one more time before you go. But it takes 1 second, and it means everything for getting these stories out to more people who need to hear them. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. There is another story coming that you will not want to miss. I will see you in the next one.